A pleasure to meet all at last, and welcome back once again to films I should have talked about years ago. And so, after all that I've said about The Secret Life of Pets, we of course have to jump onto the sequel, The Secret Life of Pets 2. Now, in terms of the storyline, what we have here is the fact that while the first film gave us basically just a woman and her dog Max, eventually bringing Duke in along for the ride, there eventually comes a family. Yeah, so you can just say that time has passed since the last film's events took place, and after all that happened with Snowball and whatnot, we could say that a happy marriage and eventually a child is brought in. So, apart from the fact that there is a husband and father with the child, now inside the same apartment as what we have with Katie, Duke, and Max, we now have ourselves a few other things to contend with. First of all, a couple of problems that Max is experiencing, eventually having some itchiness. It unfortunately requires him to wear a cone. A cone from the vet that actually sticks on for a little while. But, of course, we do also got to talk about the fact that a few jump cuts take place here and there with a few other characters. We, of course, have our usual cast, like I mentioned, with members such as Mel, Chloe, Gidget, and many others along the way. But we, of course, don't have nearly as much to do with these other characters as we will have with a few other characters that will eventually get introduced. Basically, to put it this way, Max, Duke, and the family are all going on a special road trip to the countryside. A farm, in particular, is where they intend on going to. Gidget is eventually entrusted with a Busy Bee toy that unfortunately gets lost in the hands of a certain cat lady home. So, while we do jump back and forth between the scenes relating to Busy Bee and the scenes relating to what Max and company are doing at the farm, the most important thing here that we have to work with is the fact that it all will eventually lead up to an epic clash between both of these segments of the plot, much like what we have in climaxes of many other films, like Star Wars: The Phantom Menace, and even The Avengers. So, with every character arc and every single segment relating to the plot eventually coming together to form a unified climax, what we have until then, though, basically gives us, first off, that Max is still having struggles with the Conan, and even though there are a few other things going on, including some intolerant cows, chickens, and other farm animals that cause Max to feel pretty fearful for himself. A howl comes out in the distance, and eventually the figure reveals himself. Rooster, a farm dog played by the one and only Harrison Ford. Yeah, this was a few years after he had just returned as Han Solo from Star Wars, only to get killed off by surprise. Yeah, that was pretty impressive, by writing perspective or otherwise. Anyways, though, Rooster and Max are actually meant upon to close each other's arcs off in a unique way. Max, of course, has a lot of his problems. Meanwhile, Rooster hasn't had all that much company, alike himself. So you could say that apart from his loneliness as well as his neurosis, as described by some people, these two would eventually come together in a number of different ways throughout the duration of the trip. Of course, while the cone would eventually come off of Max's head, it of course wouldn't go by without any words from Rooster. A lot of encouragement that stems around a long period of time with him working on the farm and eventually howling at the moon during night. And while he of course is seen as a local Welsh sheepdog, even as other sources point out, some people would think of him being more similar to that of other farm dogs like the Bernese Mountain Dog, which is known, by the way, to carry thousands of pounds. No joke. You could attach a trailer to that guy and he will literally haul it for you. So, apart from what most people would think of, the thing is, there's something else that's going on. There eventually comes around a Shih Tzu by the name of Daisy, and this is especially going on back in New York, far away from the countryside, Because even though Max and Duke, our main protagonists, are well out and about with the likes of Rooster and company on that farm, we do get a lot of segues that give us clues as to what Gidget and Chloe are up to. And even though there's very little transmission of it over to Max and Duke, most of the plots will basically speak for themselves. And I will say firsthand, that's probably one of the more arguable pieces as to what gave this film its ratings as well as its box office. Just the fact that we have more of the other characters, the ancillary ones, so to speak, as in the ones that aren't exactly as important or even well looked at on the posters. Max and Duke are commonly seen as the highest protagonist that the franchise itself had to offer, but it does make sense to a certain extent that they give more room for the others to improve. I mean, we haven't had all that much coming from Gidget, Chloe, Mel, and everybody else. And while they are introducing newer characters here in the sequel, not just Rooster and whatnot, but Daisy the Shih Tzu eventually comes around talking about a white tiger. A white tiger that apparently is being held captive. So we do have ourselves some villains here to work with. Although it's kind of more the typical cliche stuff. Handlers of a white tiger that are taking him to who knows where. But when all is said and done, an epic scene is all put together in which that while we do have a return of Max and Duke, it all comes around thanks to the rescuing of the Busy Bee toy, thanks to Gidget and Chloe, and of course, the cat lady, driving her car and putting on some sick beats along the way. I will say, compared to the bad guys, it almost rivals it. Even though Secret Life of Pets 2 precedes Bad Guys, they both had their share of car driving scenes with that bop it to the music stuff. But nonetheless, even though we haven't seen much of Max and Duke handling a lot of the plot elements or even the villains in this film, we do at least get a lot of opportunities for all the other characters to come around, especially Chloe and Gidget. Considering the fact that this was more their responsibility, it eventually made sense knowing that there were other plot elements just randomly coming in when they were already trying to deal with one problem at a time. It's kind of like what happened with Shrek, you know? He was already on a quest to get his swamp back, and then he gets another quest from Lord Farquaad to rescue a princess. And supposedly, it would allow for him to get his swamp back. So they're basically stacking one plot element on top of another, and then another, and then another, until it all comes down to in which that everything is solved all at once. It's a bit of a unique turn of events that I'm actually pretty glad that they were able to accomplish here, especially knowing that the pacing was a bit on the fast side. Somewhat arguable as well. But other than that, this was actually a good sequel. I'm actually impressed that they were able to do something a bit more original here. It could have been because people had called out about the elements of the first film being similar to other films and franchises, like Toy Story as I mentioned before, but Secret Life of Pets 2, in all seriousness, it does the best that it can, even though it doesn't have very much of our most beloved protagonists so far. And there has, believe it or not, been talks about a so-called Secret Life of Pets 3. In a similar regard as to how it took several years for them to create a Despicable Me 4, we are in fact going to be getting another Secret Life of Pets film, even though it will be a little while before it ever comes around. We have yet to even receive any teasers about it, but Illuminations had made announcements some time ago that there will be a part 3 to all of this. You know, I'm more than impressed at what the last few years of the decade are going to turn out to be. We're going to have sequels to various franchises that were left in the last decade. Angry Birds movie, Secret Life of Pets, Sonic the Hedgehog. We're going to be getting sequels to them throughout the latter half of the 2020s. Or, as you might remember, we have famously called this the slobbering 20s. Because times have gotten so simpler because of all this tech just ruining our lives, it's made everybody's brains turn to mush, thereby making them slobber like little goofs. That is the best and probably the most appropriate way that I can describe it without getting harassed. So what do I have to say about The Secret Life of Pets 2? Score-wise, it's an 8.2 out of 10.1. Almost a 1 point difference between it and the original. But I'm sure that Secret Life of Pets 3, with all the years that they've been spending working on this film, up until possibly 27 or 28, which is a little while from now, but I can see it happening. Just like with Angry Birds Movie 3, with Sega having mass success over the Sonic the Hedgehog films, I am sure that they will do a good job giving us an Angry Birds movie follow-up in the coming years or so. So if Illumination could do the same with Secret Life of Pets, then I will be more than happy to close off the decade with some more light at the end of the tunnel that we have been going through for some time. Otherwise, that's all I got to offer for now. Make sure to like, subscribe, comment, follow me wherever you can find me, and stay on the Hollywood side for more.